Hey guys, how you doing today? Just got out of a friend's place, walking home. What the hey? Let's chat. Let's have a conversation. What the heck is even going on? What the heck's banging around in my head even? Oh my goodness. I've been talking and thinking a lot about the movie Hackers, right? Remember Hackers? Hackers is a great movie, man. I haven't actually seen it in a long time, so everything I'm about to say I'm saying from memory, but I have a pretty clear vision of that movie. I watched it a lot when I was a kid. Like, it was a movie that was well ahead of its time, if you ask me. Like, what's interesting about the movie Hackers is that it's a movie that's well ahead of its time in terms of its subject matter, but in terms of its presentation, it's firmly rooted in the 90s. Like, you're gonna watch Hackers and you're gonna be like, this is a 90s movie, man. This is a movie that came out of the 90s, no doubt. And but the subject matter of this group of young people, hackers, having to fight against a corporate power structure that is attempting to pursue what they consider an illegitimate form of businessing. I think it's quite interesting, and I think it's a thing that, if that movie were to come out today, I think people would think it was very popular. I think, well, people wouldn't think it was very popular. I think it would be a very popular movie, be a very popular subject. And it's something I'm thinking a lot about recently, which is, like, I feel like there are lots and lots of movies that have as their villain a corporate owner, right? A corporate businessman. But that corporate businessman is always presented as outside of the norm, right? Whereas I'm yet to see movies that are about this class, this corporate class, and the underclass. This is actually what I'm fascinated by. I've been paying a lot of attention to Cyberpunk 77. Yeah, I've been paying a lot of attention to this video game that's coming up. Cyberpunk 77 to 2077. That it's a new video game that's coming out, and I hate when I start getting into video games. There's immediately this like sense of like, oh, video games for babies, and I'm like, these are $1 billion companies. It is a $1 billion industry. The cultural impact alone of some of these video games is can't be dismissed. And I really do think that a game like Cyberpunk 2077, it has all the hallmarks of, at the very least, being a culturally important video game that is probably going to spawn an entire genre of, like, not an entire genre, but an entire franchise of television shows and movies. I expect to see that. Given the amount of energy and weight that has put into this game. And it's set in like the post-apocalyptic future narrative, right? Which is essentially stolen from Fallout, and like, I don't know, I feel like the post-apocalyptic genre has been well trodden, you know? It's getting to the point where it's like zombie films. Like, zombie films went through like this, like, everything was zombies for a little while. There was like 2 new zombie films every single year. There was The Walking Dead, right? Like, every board game and video game I played was like centered around zombies, and we suddenly got deeply fascinated with zombies and the idea of like, we die but then we come back, you know? So the zombie craze petered out, and I feel very similar to the post-apocalyptic stuff. I feel like we've been seeing a lot of post-apocalyptic movies where there's people living in a post-apocalyptic future who have to overthrow the ruling class and take over and all this kind of stuff. And as I'm saying that, here's this film, Cyberpunk 2077, that's like set in a post-apocalyptic future, but I also feel has some very interesting and timely things to say about that future. Now, I want to be real clear. This game hasn't even come out yet. Everything I'm saying is coming from just previews and reviews and things I've seen about it. But there are things that are baked in that make it obvious that they at least are going to want to say certain things about the structure of things. So it's set in this post-apocalyptic future where like the nukes have gone off, that there are wastelands, and from the wasteland arises this central city, which is, of course, itself a city-state, because there is no federated government, right? The government administration has collapsed. That there's no, and the forces that have taken over, the people who are running the place, are essentially large-scale corporations, right? That large-scale corporations vie for power and control of this city, which exists in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. And they have a very clear class structure built into the game. You can either play as a nomad, who's a person who lives in the wastelands. You can play as a street kid, which is essentially somebody who doesn't work for corporations. And then you can play as what they call a corpo, which is essentially someone who works for corporations. And that this is like a storytelling anchor that lets you explore the world from from each perspective. And the thing is, though, is that I feel like Cyberpunk 77 has nailed the idea that, like, in the future, if things continue in this trajectory, and if they continue on the historical trend, that is the structure of how the classes will work. That there will be people who live outside the city, and they'll have their own perspective and agenda. Then there'll be people who live within the cities, and the people who don't work for corporations will be considered of a different class from the people who do work for corporations. And the corporations themselves, and of course the owners, the people who own these corporations, will be their own sort of power structure and their own ruler, right? Because what it is it's a neo-feudal system. That the way to organize a city administratively is to privatize all interests, to give control of the of roads, of all things, in this very libertarian, corporate-owned structure, which is neo-feudalism. And I feel like that's what this game is really nailing and hitting on, that its perception of what the political alignment of our future is going to look like should things continue on this trajectory without any interference from the populace, let's say, that's where we're going to end. We're going to end in this neo-feudal state where if you work for corporations to fulfill their objectives, then you'll be given a modest kind of subsistence life that is reasonable. You'll get access to a tier of toys, like new gadgets and gizmos and things like this that come out, so long as you're working for the corporate interest. And if you don't, then you'll be excluded from that, right? That your primary adversary will be the police who work for the corporations. And of course the nomads are just completely like disconnected from any of this, right? Your rural farmers whose only way to interact with the cities in a meaningful way is to vote for a politician who they themselves work for the interests of the corporation. This is the future that we're heading for sure, unless we stand up and do something about it. And our corporate media, because our media is completely already controlled by corporate interests, we do have a state-run television station, a state-run network called the CBC, but the CBC works on behalf of those who are in power, right? They will always move forward with the agenda that's been put forward by the ruling government, because they're a state-sponsored television, right? Like if they start, they can't turn against the state. I still like the CBC a great deal, because I do think that the CBC is also there to just release factual information. They will just release an article that is about an investigation on just a marketplace situation, some facts, things like that. Without editorialization. That's one thing I think is desperately needed in our news, and what I do think the CBC does provide, which is just, these are the events that occurred without any editorialization whatsoever. But even the CBC is fairly quiet on the major protests that are going throughout the world right now. There are major protests happening in France at the moment. And as we all know, the French people have a long history of violent protest, because they understand that violent protest is actually how you get stuff done. And now you've got, I forget if it's 20 million or 200 million. You've got millions of people in India protesting. Millions. If there was 1 million people there, that would be a huge number. But they've got 20 million people, at least 20 million, in India, just protesting what the government is doing. And our own media, the corporate media, is completely dead silent on it. And the CBC will release an article saying that it happened, at the very least. Because they don't want us to understand that the way that we overthrow this system is through protest. That the way that we end what's happening is not through electoral politics. Electoral politics is the end of the process. You understand that once something happens in the House of Commons, all that's happening in the House of Commons is the ratification of what has already been agreed upon in the populace. That's it, right? That politicians will always work in their own interests. They will always fight for their own interests. They will never get into people aren't getting into politics to fight for the little guy, right? If that were the case, the Flint, Michigan situation would have already been solved decades ago, right? People are getting into politics for the prestige and for their own wealth, so that when they go to brunch with the people who they respect, and that they're well respected. They're not actually interested in resolving any of these large-scale problems. That's what the populace is supposed to do. And the populace does that through persistent mass protest, right? That it's through the process of protest that the populace communicates to itself during and through the protest movement. That is how it organizes itself. It doesn't organize itself on Facebook. It doesn't organize itself through YouTube videos. Here I am, hi, hello. I understand that it's not going to manifest itself through these videos, but perhaps what it could do is operate as an anchor point for protest, that I can spread this information around. If somebody were to say to me, hey, there's a protest going on at this place on May the 1st, I would for sure talk about that. I'd for sure talk about that, and I'd for sure send it out there. But where the true organization happens, is on the streets with the people, seeing how many of you there actually are, understanding the energy of what's happening, organizing and saying and convincing people straight out, like, there are people we will not vote for and there are people we will vote for, right? Because this is one thing I think about all the time. I think about this shit all the time. I went out east, and I was living out east for a year. And when I was there, every single person I spoke to was an NDP supporter that voted Liberal. Every single person out there wanted to vote NDP, wanted to send the message that they wanted to vote NDP, or that they would vote NDP by voting NDP, but was afraid that their neighbor wouldn't, right? So each person wanted to vote NDP, but wouldn't do it because they were afraid that their neighbor wouldn't. And if all of these people came out in protest on a specific issue, they would see pretty clearly, these are the people who would vote NDP. These are the people who are not going to vote Liberal, who are not going to vote Conservative. Look at how many people are coming out in support of this issue, are coming out in support of an NDP leader, or a Green leader, right? Or the fact that you're just getting all together to speak about this issue. Like when the climate rally happened here in Toronto, here's a take you'll never ever get from corporate media. When the climate rally happened here in Toronto, that scared the shit out of the ruling class. That scared the shit out of the ruling class. The ruling class saw hundreds of thousands of people came to that rally. It was an enormous rally that happened. There were parades. My complaint about it, of course, is that everybody just went home, right? Everybody just went home. Everybody came out. We all agreed that climate change is an issue that we should be paying attention to. We held a big fucking rally about it. And then we all went home. Justin Trudeau got his little photo up, clapped his hands and was like, yeah, Canada, climate change, we all agree, and then went home and did fuck all about it. Banned straws, I guess. But that moment, right? Imagine if 100,000 people took to the streets of Toronto in protest of climate change. They saw this photo op that this living haircut Justin Trudeau put on and went, fuck you, you piece of living shit. Do something meaningful. And then didn't leave. And then just maintained the protest. And then just kept going with this protest. And then marched down the 400 and took over the corner of 400 and 401 and shut the highways down. And imagine if that started to happen and then the protests started to spread. Right? Imagine if the people just took to the streets and didn't give up and didn't relent. Like, you're talking about the end of political dynasties with this. This is how this would happen, right? That the people would come to the streets and agree as one that at the very least there's a political dynasty that needs to end. And then eventually that would be ratified through the House of Commons. But things are agreed upon on the streets first, right? Like, it was well understood amongst me and my friends and everyone around me, like everyone, and even amongst the lowest of the low classes, right? That nobody should go to jail for marijuana. That's absurd. We all understood that. And no police officer would bother white people about that. no police officer would bother white people about that, right? It was very strictly for the minorities and the lower class. It was very clear that that was the case. Like, you wouldn't even hear a story of a white person being arrested for this. Like, maybe harassed, maybe you'd end up with like a little misdemeanor kind of nonsense, nothing. But even that was always done with the sort of spirit of like, yeah, that'll scare you straight, which it never did because it was pointless. But so we had all agreed, even amongst the police, we'd all agreed, this is not a thing that we're going to bother people with. And so eventually when it gets ratified in the House of Commons, right, nothing changes in the populace, right? Nothing changes in the populace except that we all now understand, yeah, this is, nobody's going to jail for this, right? No one's going to be bothered by this the way it should have been, right? It was an absurdity that people were going to jail for this. It's an absurdity that people weren't pardoned for this. But it was agreed upon in the populace first, and then it goes to the House of Commons to be finally ratified. And if we want to have that process sped up for issues like climate change, for issues like a basic income, for issues like this, then we're going to have to create long protests with energy behind them that last for long periods of time, that take over significant pieces of infrastructure unabashedly, right? That the criticisms that come towards a protest movement such as what I'm describing need to be simply dismissed as childish attempts to prevent adults from moving forward with what we all know needs to happen, right? We all know. We all understand what needs to happen. Like, we're just sort of kicking our heels, pretending like, oh, maybe we won't have to. It's not even a state of denial, really. It's just that cruel unwillingness, that desire to put it off, to just be like, we can just wait like just a little longer, and we don't need to start clamping down, and we don't need to start doing this, and we don't need to start like acknowledging the hard reality and the hard truths about like what's coming our way. And we don't need to start rationing, and we don't need to start moving our economy to a government-controlled war economy, which is what we need. Without a doubt. Like, without a doubt. There's no reason to continue moving forward with this economy of chaos, right? Which is what a free market is, right? A free market is an economy of chaos. They're literally chaos death knights. Like, that, to say that all things will come out okay if we just allow the market to decide is to say that you are a believer in chaos. That from chaos, order will result. And while it's true that chaos will result in something happening, it's not necessarily going to result in anything that's beneficial for the populace, for the people who live in the society, right? That this free market chaos theory of just letting, of having no intrinsic plan, right? Of just simply allowing self-interested, greedy corporatists to communicate with one another, and they will be the ones who organize the society, and that somehow will result in the best possible scenario for people. It's absolute lunacy. We need a centralized government force. We need a centralized governmental force to take over this issue, and to put some urgency on this issue, and to stop bullshitting about it, and to stop pretending as though this nonsense of what we're doing here, where we're banning plastic bags and banning straws, as if, there, we did it. Putting like a tiny little carbon tax on it. There, we did it. Like, these are the minor gestures of a placating force. This is what I would do to placate my support. To be like, okay, I'll put on a carbon tax. Can I be the Prime Minister? Okay, straws. Can I be the Prime Minister? Right? This is not the actions of a person who genuinely believes that we're in a state of emergency. Right? These are not the actions of a person who genuinely believes that if we don't do something serious right now, if we don't have a centralized government take over the levers of power and actually move the society in a direction with an intention and a plan. If we don't actually have that, we will be overwhelmed, okay? Because we're literally standing here saying with our free market idea that, well, we'll let chaos decide. Well, one of the things that chaos can decide is, I will overwhelm and destroy you. Chaos will decide that, without a doubt. I will overwhelm and destroy you is absolutely something that chaos can result in. And if we're going to stand here and say that the forces of humanity can outplay or outmaneuver the forces of the universe in a game of chaos, we're very arrogant and gullible people if we believe that that's the case. We're a very arrogant and gullible people if we believe that we can just act in a manner that is chaotic against a universe that will also play by those rules and believe that we will survive it. The universe has presented us with a state of order. There is a way to maintain order. The rules of that order are built into the system itself. And if you don't play by those rules, it will wipe you out and move on. And if we don't, at the very least, have a centralized authority within our own borders who will acknowledge that those rules exist and then play within those rules, we will be wiped out. Games like Cyberpunk 2077 will be a relic that people will look back upon and be like, they saw it coming. Like, they saw it coming. Why didn't they do anything about it? That will be the question that humanity leaves behind. Why didn't we do anything about it?